When you think of the end of the American Revolution, you probably picture Yorktown, right? 1781, the big surrender. But what if I told you the war was really won 4 years before that? Yeah? Today, we're going to dig into the one single campaign that actually sealed Britain's fate.
So, what was this big moment, this great turning point? Well, you can forget about those later battles down south for a minute. The real game changer, the event that flipped the entire script, happened way earlier, deep in the woods of upstate New York.
Okay, so when we say turning point, what are we really talking about? It's not just another win on the scoreboard. A turning point is when the whole game changes. It's that moment where everything pivots and there's just no going back. For the American Revolution, that moment was Saratoga.
And you know, historian Edmund Morgan he hit the nail on the head with this. He pointed out that this wasn't just a big deal because the Americans won a battle. No, its real power was what happened after. This was the moment that turned a little colonial rebellion into a full-blown global conflict.
All right, so to really get why Saratoga was such a bombshell, we got to look at what the British were trying to do in 1777. I mean, on paper, their plan was perfect. It was this brilliant strategy that was supposed to just crush the whole rebellion in one fell swoop.
And the goal? Oh, it was simple, but it was smart. They wanted to cut the head off the snake. The idea was to seize control of the Hudson River Valley in New York. If they could do that, they'd cut off New England, the real heart of the rebellion, from all the other colonies. It would split the Americans in two and just choke them out.
So, how are they going to do it? With a classic three-pronged attack. You've got one army, led by General Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne, marching south from Canada. Then you've got another, smaller force coming from the west under Colonel St. Leger. And then the main army, led by General Howe, was supposed to come north from New York City. The grand finale? All three of them meet up in Albany. They link arms and boom, war's over. Sounds easy enough, right?
Well, as you can probably guess, even the most perfect plans can go spectacularly wrong. This whole complex operation, it was about to become a textbook example of everything not to do. And man, did it go wrong. First off, General Howe, instead of heading north like he was supposed to, he gets this idea in his head to go capture Philadelphia instead. So he takes his whole army and sails south. Meanwhile, St. Leger's attack from the west, it gets crushed. They're forced to turn around and run all the way back to Canada. So, just like that, 2 of the 3 armies are gone. And Burgoyne, he's all alone, getting deeper and deeper into enemy territory with no backup.
So what happened? Why did this perfect plan just fall apart? Well, it was like a perfect storm of failure. For one, the communication was just awful. Messages between the generals in London were slow and confusing. Then you've got Howe doing his own thing down in Philly. But you absolutely cannot forget about the American resistance. They were fierce. They basically weaponized the forest, chopping down thousands of trees, destroying bridges, anything to slow Burgoyne's massive army down to a crawl.
And listen, we're not talking about a little patrol here. We're talking about almost 8,000 troops. Imagine trying to move an army that big, with all its cannons, wagons, and supplies, through a thick forest where the enemy has blocked every single path. That huge, powerful force was now basically stuck, running out of food and supplies hundreds of miles from any help.
So Burgoyne is completely isolated. He's running out of food, he's trapped. His only move is to try and fight his way through. And what comes next? Well, it's not just another battle. It's a moment that's going to send shockwaves across the entire world.
Things started off pretty good for Burgoyne. He captured Fort Ticonderoga without much of a fight. But that's where his luck ran out. As he kept pushing south, the American army, led by General Horatio Gates, just got bigger and stronger. They finally clashed in 2 really brutal battles, Freeman's Farm and Bemis Heights. The British were stopped, and then they were pushed back. And suddenly, they were completely surrounded. No way out, no help on the way. Burgoyne had to do the unthinkable.
And this painting really says it all. You're looking at a British general surrendering his entire army, not to another European power, but to a ragtag force of rebels. For the biggest, baddest military on the planet, this was more than just a loss. It was a complete and utter humiliation.
And believe me, the world was paying attention. Over in Europe, in the palaces of Paris and Madrid, the news of Saratoga landed like an explosion. This was the proof everyone had been waiting for. It showed that these American rebels weren't just some minor annoyance. They could actually go head-to-head with the British Army and win.
And this, right here, is why Saratoga is so important. This is where the real payoff happens. Because all the way across the Atlantic, in Paris, a very powerful and very clever man had been watching and waiting for exactly this kind of news.
This guy right here is the Comte de Vergennes. He's the French foreign minister. And you have to remember, France was still pretty angry about losing to Britain in a previous war. They were itching for revenge. So they'd been secretly sending some money and guns to the Americans, but they weren't ready to go all in. A real alliance? That was a massive risk. Vergennes needed to know the Americans could actually pull this off.
Saratoga was that proof. It was the signal he was waiting for. It proved the Americans weren't on a suicide mission. It showed that, with a little help, a lot of help actually, they could win this thing. All of a sudden, backing the Americans didn't seem so risky. It looked like a golden opportunity.
And wow, did France move fast. Just a few months later, in February 1778, they signed the Treaty of Alliance. And this wasn't just some piece of paper promising to be friends. This was a full-on military alliance. The second that ink was dry, the American Revolution completely transformed. It was no longer a local rebellion. It was now a global war. And Great Britain was in deep trouble.
I mean, you really can't overstate how huge this was. France started sending everything the Americans were desperate for. We're talking money, lots of it, professional soldiers, guns and supplies, and, this is the big one, a real powerful navy. A navy that could actually challenge the British on the seas. Let me be clear, without the French Navy trapping the British at Yorktown, that final victory just doesn't happen.
So when you look back, Saratoga was so much more than just a battle. It was the linchpin. It knocked an entire British army out of the war, it gave a massive boost to American morale, but most importantly, it opened the door to the French alliance. And that alliance was the final piece of the puzzle the Americans needed to actually win their independence. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What if General Howe had just marched north like he was supposed to? What if he hadn't been so obsessed with Philadelphia? Just a couple of different decisions, a different turn of events in the middle of a New York forest, and the history of the United States, and really the whole world, could look completely different today.